Book the Third, Chapter 9 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Book the Third, Chapter 9. She Knows the Truth. 1. From Mr. Bashwood to Miss Gwilt. Thorpe Ambrose, July 20th, 1851. Dear Madam, I received yesterday by private messenger your obliging note, in which you direct me to communicate with you through the post only, as long as there is reason to believe that any visitors who may come to you are likely to be observed. May I be permitted to say that I look forward with respectful anxiety to the time when I shall again enjoy the only real happiness I have ever experienced, the happiness of personally addressing you. In compliance with your desire that I should not allow this day, the Sunday, to pass without privately noticing what went on at the great house, I took the keys, and went this morning to the steward's office. I accounted for my appearance to the servants by informing them that I had work to do which was important to complete in the shortest possible time. The same excuse would have done for Mr. Armadale if we had met, but no such meeting happened. Although I was at Thorpe Ambrose in what I thought good time, I was too late to see or hear anything myself of a serious quarrel which appeared to have taken place, just before I arrived, between Mr. Armadale and Mr. Midwinter. All the little information I can give you in this matter is derived from one of the servants. The man told me that he heard the voices of the two gentlemen loud in Mr. Armadale's sitting-room. He went in to announce breakfast shortly afterward, and found Mr. Midwinter in such a dreadful state of agitation that he had to be helped out of the room. The servant tried to take him upstairs to lie down and compose himself. He declined, saying he would wait a little first in one of the lower rooms, and begging that he might be left alone. The man had hardly got downstairs again when he heard the front door opened and closed. He ran back, and found that Mr. Midwinter was gone. The rain was pouring at the time, and thunder and lightning came soon afterward. Dreadful weather, certainly, to go out in. The servant thinks Mr. Midwinter's mind was unsettled. I sincerely hope not. Mr. Midwinter is one of the few people I have met with in the course of my life who have treated me kindly. Hearing that Mr. Armadale still remained in the sitting-room, I went into the steward's office, which, as you may remember, is on the same side of the house, and left the door ajar and set the window open, waiting and listening for anything that might happen. Dear madam, there was a time when I might have thought such a position in the house of my employer not a very becoming one. Let me hasten to assure you that this is far from being my feeling now. I glory in any position which makes me serviceable to you. The state of the weather seemed hopelessly adverse to that renewal of intercourse between Mr. Armadale and Miss Milroy, which you so confidently anticipate, and of which you are so anxious to be made aware. Strangely enough, however, it is actually in consequence of the state of the weather that I am now in a position to give you the very information you require. Mr. Armadale and Miss Milroy met about an hour since. The circumstances were as follows. Just at the beginning of the thunderstorm, I saw one of the grooms run across from the stables, and heard him tap at his master's window. Mr. Armadale opened the window and asked what was the matter. The groom said he came with a message from the coachman's wife. She had seen from her room over the stables, which looks out on to the park, Miss Milroy quite alone, standing for shelter under one of the trees. As that part of the park was at some distance from the major's cottage, she had thought that her master might wish to send and ask the young lady into the house. especially as she had placed herself, with a thunderstorm coming on, in what might turn out to be a very dangerous position. The moment Mr. Armadale understood the man's message, he called for the waterproof things and the umbrellas, and ran out himself, instead of leaving it to the servants. In a little time he and the groom came back with Miss Milroy between them, as well protected as could be from the rain. I ascertained from one of the women servants, who had taken the young lady into a bedroom, and had supplied her with such dry things as she wanted, that Miss Milroy had been afterwards shown into the drawing-room, and that Mr. Armadale was there with her. The only way of following your instructions and finding out what passed between them was to go round the house in the pelting rain, and get into the conservatory, which opens into the drawing-room, by the outer door. I hesitate at nothing, dear madam, in your service. I would cheerfully get wet every day to please you. Besides, though I may at first sight be thought rather an elderly man, a wetting is of no very serious consequence to me. I assure you I am not so old as I look, and I am of a stronger constitution than appears. It was impossible for me to get near enough in the conservatory to see what went on in the drawing-room, without the risk of being discovered, but most of the conversation reached me, except when they dropped their voices. This is the substance of what I heard. I gathered that Miss Milroy had been prevailed on, against her will, to take refuge from the thunderstorm in Mr. Armadale's house. She said so, at least, and she gave two reasons. The first was that her father had forbidden all intercourse between the cottage and the great house. Mr. Armadale met this objection by declaring that her father had issued his orders under a total misconception of the truth, and by entreating her not to treat him as cruelly as the major had treated him. He entered, I suspect, into some explanations at this point, but as he dropped his voice I am unable to say what they were. His language, when I did hear it, was confused and ungrammatical. It seemed, however, to be quite intelligible enough to persuade Miss Milroy that her father had been acting under a mistaken impression of the circumstances. At least I infer this, for when I next heard the conversation, the young lady was driven back to her second objection to being in the house, which was that Mr. Armadale had behaved very badly to her, and that he richly deserved that she should never speak to him again. In this latter case Mr. Armadale attempted no defence of any kind. He agreed with her that he had behaved badly. He agreed with her that he richly deserved she should never speak to him again. At the same time he implored her to remember that he had suffered his punishment already. He was disgraced in the neighbourhood, and his dearest friend, his one intimate friend in the world, had that very morning turned against him like the rest. Far or near there was not a living creature whom he was fond of to comfort him, or to say a friendly word to him. He was lonely and miserable, and his heart ached for a little kindness, and that was his only excuse for asking Miss Milroy to forget and forgive the past. I must leave you, I fear, to judge for yourself of the effect of this on the young lady, for, though I tried hard, I failed to catch what she said. I am almost certain I heard her crying, and Mr. Armadale entreating her not to break his heart. They whispered a great deal, which aggravated me. I was afterward alarmed by Mr. Armadale coming out into the conservatory to pick some flowers. He did not come as far, fortunately, as the place where I was hidden, and he went in again into the drawing-room, and there was more talking, I suspect at close quarters, which to my great regret I again failed to catch. Pray forgive me for having so little to tell you. I can only add that when the storm cleared off, Miss Milroy went away with the flowers in her hand, and with Mr. Armadale escorting her from the house. My own humble opinion is that he had a powerful friend at court all through the interview, in the young lady